Skyblock farms have evolved a lot. I mean, given the amount of nerfs we've endured as the admins ruthlessly destroy the designs patch after patch, it's not really a surprise. Yet what if I told you that I found a design which outperforms every single farm layout that has ever existed? It doesn't even require you to slash warp garden or fall into the void, meaning it's fully loopable. I'll explain my thought process behind it, why it's actually so good, and a detailed tutorial on how to build it. So grab your hose, grow your crops, and enjoy. A guide to the ultimate Skyblock farm. Now, to understand what makes a good farm, I need to explain a few things. The first one being a tick, which is basically Minecraft's way of measuring time. 1 second has a total of 20 ticks, so 1 tick lasts 50 milliseconds. Though the relevant part here is that an action, like for example breaking a crop, can only happen once per tick. Or in other words, the game only allows you to register 20 crops per second, i.e. 1 crop per tick. If you try to go any higher, it will just not be registered, meaning the theoretical best farm would be one where you are constantly breaking 20 crops per second. Again, anything higher is impossible. And this is exactly why in a 5-block wide farm you move at 93 speed, because if you move any slower you will start going under the 20 crops broken per second threshold. But more importantly, if you move any faster, you'll start missing crops because you're just moving too quickly. However, you'd still be breaking 20 crops per second, just not with near 100% efficiency. Which leads me to my second point. Why 93 speed? Sure, it's the lowest value you can go at while still maintaining 20 breaks per second. But why can't we just go with, say, 100 speed? I mean, you'll miss a couple crops, but it doesn't really matter, right? And technically you're correct, but you're also missing one key problem. You see, the garden is not an infinite expanse, meaning we can only make our farms so long before reaching the border. So while farming, eventually we will have to perform something called a lane switch, like dropping down in a vertical farm or moving forward in an S-shaped one. Though the problem here is that while in the lane switch you aren't actually breaking any crops, and you can really see why this is an issue if you look at the average breaks per second of different farm layouts, some of which drop from 20 to as low as 18, which is 1/10 of your profit being thrown in the trash purely because you've spent 5% of your time not actually farming. And this is why we travel at 93 speed, because if we're on 100, we would reach the end of our lane faster, meaning we have to lane switch more often. This is also why a 5-block wide farm is better than say a 4 or 3 block, because it allows you to move at a lower speed while still maintaining 20 breaks per second, again making you reach the lane switch less frequently. Yet even if you're moving at the optimal speed and using a 5-block wide farm, you're still doing the lane switch, just not as often. Meaning the goal of making the best crop farm equates to design a farm that minimizes the amount of time it takes to lane switch. Now originally we could place TP pads and teleport ourselves onto the next row, or utilize launch pads plus ice to hyper boost ourselves across the lane switch, both of which did a great job at minimizing our downtime. However, the admins quickly caught onto this and decided to remove both items from the garden. Thank you, Hypixel. So naturally, Skyblock players improvised and came up with a strong solution: vertical farms, where instead of walking forward to lane switch, we simply just drop down. And for a while, this was considered the most efficient method, until about a month ago when I discovered something crucial. For as long as the garden has been around, Skyblock players focused on building farms that minimize the time spent in a lane switch. Though what if the strategy is not to try and shorten it, but instead design a system where you're breaking crops even while you alternate rows, meaning your BPS would effectively never drop, which is something not even teleport pads were able to achieve. But obviously this idea has one major problem: the fact that you can't really look at or break crops while being in a lane switch, because you're either staring at air or there's a block in your face. And admittedly, this was a point that I was stuck on for a while, until I visited an old sugarcane farm. It looks fairly ordinary, however what struck me was the way you farm it, which is by aligning yourself in a 45-degree angle, rushing through the farm and then switching keys once you've reached the end. Yet the relevant part here is the lane switch itself, because if you haven't noticed, while performing it, you're kind of just aiming at air. Air that could be replaced with crops, that you can break while being in a lane switch, and that's when I clicked. The key to breaking crops during a lane switch is using a 45-degree farm design. So quickly I rushed back to my testing grounds to get to work, and within a couple hours I had a fully functioning farm. By now you're probably wondering, that's all very cool, but how do I actually use or build the farm? So let me explain. To begin, you position yourself right after the bottom left corner with a speed cap of 327 and a yield value of exactly 45.00. If you're farming wheat or netherwort, your pitch can be anywhere from 3 to 0, though if you're farming carrots/potatoes, you'll need to lower it to the 3 to 2 radius. This is because the hitbox of these crops for some reason is smaller. I don't know why, but it just means we can't break them unless we lower our cursor, which I don't think is a massive problem. I also recommend getting a mod called SkyAnnie due to its breaks per second stats so you can actually verify it's constantly 20. I'll provide a link to their Discord in the description. Anyway, to begin farming, you simply hold W and left click. Also, this is really important, make sure you're sprinting. Despite it not changing your speed for now, you will absolutely need it later. Once you've reached the end of the first row, you simply let go of W and hold down A. If everything went well, you'll bump into the wall behind you and you can begin the second lane, again without losing any BPS. Then once you've reached the opposing end, it's a fairly similar process, this time switching from A back to W. And you repeat this process until you're on the last lane, which is where a casual vertical farm enjoyer would just type/warp garden, but not us, because this is where the final part of the farm comes into play. After reaching the last row, you quickly switch from holding your A key to your S key, so that you get pushed into the wall behind you. And this is crucial because when you reach the end of the lane, you'll simply glide past the corner without having to do anything. Though once you've passed the first bend, you need to switch from S to D, so when you loop around to the beginning, you again do not need to react. And finally, you switch from D back to W to complete one cycle of the farm. And there you have it, a complete run-through of how the farm works. Before begin build, make sure you have a total of 5 plots in any direction where you can make the farm. And if you can afford it, I'd even recommend getting 2 sets of 5 plots aligned side by side. It's not necessary and a single row of 5 plots works perfectly fine, but it would make your life a lot easier. I'll explain why in a bit. You should also empty a plot to bedrock and paste it over to all of your other plots. Again, you don't need to do this, but it does allow you to stack up to 5 farms on top of one another. Also, for the sake of you being able to see the entire farm, I'll only build 1 plot of it, but please don't copy me, it's for explanation purposes only. Alright, once you have everything, we can finally begin building the farm. Go to the very end of your excavation, either side is fine, and place 2 rows of blocks on top of one another. Make sure it's bordering the void and that it's at least 2 blocks high. Then, facing the farm, go to the right side of the blocks you've just placed and double check that there's something bordering the plot. This is important because you'll need it to crash into at the end of the farm. If there's nothing here, you'll simply drift off after every cycle. Once you've made sure that you have something to crash into, go back to the bottom right corner, move 1 block up and 1 block to the side. Then paste 3 rows of dirt/soul sand parallel to the 2 block high wall you made a second ago. If everything went well, there should be a 1 block wide gap that you can fit through while looping back. Next, fly to the other side of the farm. Here, miss 1 block of the plot like so, and then place another 3 rows of dirt/soul sand. Then go onto the lane, move 1 block to the right of the wall and place 3 rows of farmland, leaving a 1 meter wide gap which will allow you to pass through. Back on the other side of your farm, these 2 lanes should be aligned perfectly in the shape of a reverse L. If that's the case, move 2 blocks to the right of the lane you've just pasted and then place another 3. Though this time make sure it's connected to the platform you're standing on. Then move another 2 blocks to the side of that, paste a new lane, this time with a gap, then another one without one, and continue till the end of the farm. Now if you recall from earlier, I mentioned that it's better to get 2 sets of 5 plots instead of 1, and this is where that comes in. You see, in the original design I showed you, both the forward and backward lane is made of 3 blocks, meaning when you're doing the lane switch, you'll have to have very good timing to ensure you remain on 20 BPS. But if you look at my actual farm, you'll notice the rows are a little larger. And that's because the more blocks you add per lane, the more time you have to switch keys, meaning the less reaction speed and in turn effort you need to put in. Because we all hate doing that. So going back to our farm, while you could just leave the lanes at 3 blocks and focus a bit more on the game, what I would recommend is extending your 3 block wide lanes to something like 5, given you're at least garden level 12. And if you have a higher garden level or double plots, you can add even more. Before proceeding, make sure you've decided on a value. For this tutorial, I've chosen to use 5 block wide lanes, but obviously the farm works on anything above 3. Side note, not every width will fit perfectly into 1 or 2 plots, but just keep going until either you can't fit any lanes or your last row is one without a gap and you can fit at least 3 blocks onto it. Once all your lanes are down, go back to the top right corner of your farm where we started pacing them. Here, craft a few stacks of wooden trapdoors and place them onto this platform over here. Then go back and flip them all vertically. And to finish off this side, place a row of dirt 2 blocks above the trapdoors so that they are directly above you when you're in the lane switch. If everything went well, your farm should look something like this, and you're basically done with this side for now. So go back to the other end of the farm, where our lane switches are still blocked by blocks. Let's fix that. Starting on the second lane, mine out the final strip of dirt or soul sand. Ignore the third row, mine the fourth one, and continue till you reach the last lane that you're supposed to mine. Leave this lane out and instead mine the platform to the side of it so that you can pass through when farming. You should also make sure to fill in this gap over here to finish the lane. Then, much like on the other side, pull out your trapdoors and place them onto the platform, excluding the last row. And then my favorite part of building the farm, flap them open and place a row of blocks above them like before. Finally, go back to the last row and starting from this block over here, place about 6 trapdoors and again flap them up. Make sure they are on the second block this time and that there are blocks above them. And with that, you're basically almost done. All you need to do is fill up the holes with water, turn your dirt into farmland and place your crops. So there you go, that's everything on farms. Again, I'll be releasing improved designs for other crops in the near future, so be on the lookout for that. Okay, bye.